Well, good day, everyone. Welcome to this CoachNet webinar on First Steps for Planting a Missional Church. We appreciate you taking an hour of your time this afternoon to join us for this webinar. My name is John Van Bruggen, and I will serve as your host for today's event. If you're new to CoachNet webinars, I'd like to point out the chat feature on the right side of your screen, which you can use at any time during the webinar to communicate with me as your host. And I would just ask that you please send your questions or comments for Gary to me as well, so as to not distract him from his presentation. Also want to mention that today's webinar is being recorded, and so if at any time in the future you want to view this webinar again or share it with a colleague or a teammate, you can do so by going to the CoachNet homepage, on which you will find the webinar link. Finally, I'd like to take a quick survey to find out more about who you are. And so if you could take a moment to respond to the question about what role you play in church planting, that would give us an idea about who you are and what situation you find yourself in. And if none of the categories listed there apply to you, simply click the other. And if you want to email us and let us know, we'd appreciate that as well. Well, our presenter today is Gary Rohrmeyer. Gary is the National Director of Converge USA, and he brings with him years of experience as a church planter, a church planting coach, a pastor, and a denominational leader. He has developed such resources as Life's Biggest Journey, Church Planting Landmines, and Next Steps for Leading a Missional Church. Gary is proud to call the Chicagoland his home, and without further ado, here is our presenter, Gary Rohrmeyer.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad glad you're here joining me on in our this is, I think, number 7 out of 8 webinars that we're doing, and today we're going to kind of focus on launching your public service. But first, I want to just kind of go over again, just refresh your mind about the goal of First Steps. The goal of First Steps is simple. It's our desire to help you discover the church that God has planted in your heart and to help that become a reality. We're not here to promote a certain style or model, because we believe it's going to take a multitude of churches to reach the multitudes in our cities, country, and world. And so here's the overview of the First Steps process. Basically, there are what I would call 3 theological foundations for church planting: the glory of God, the mission of God, and the kingdom of God. And then here are the stages of a church plant. There is first there's relating with God and others. That's really talking about the spiritual foundation of the church planter and those key relationships, such as prayer relationships and funding relationships that they establish. And then there's the networking and gathering. How do they network into a community? How do they enter the community missionally? And how they began gathering people in various groups. Then there's the building the launch team stage, when you begin now mobilizing and energizing people towards the launch of a new church. And then there's the designing your services and the initial strategies and ministries of the church that are going to adequately reach your community. And then the stage that we're talking about today is launching those public services. Our next time we're going to talk about how to establish the new community of faith that's going to be developed in those early ministries. And then we move on into what I call the next steps phase of church planting. How do you continue to reproduce disciples, leaders, and ministry? How do you mature your church spiritually and relationally? And then how do you begin impacting regionally and globally through your local church? And then the final stage of a church plant is how the pioneer leader exits, and how do they do that well? And so that's the full orb kind of stage of the church planting process in the First Step system. Well, today we're going to focus on stage 5, which is launching public services. And we're going to look at three dynamics here. One, you need to choose your launch approach. How are you going to launch your church? And then we're going to look at the different spheres of outreach and the strategies that work within there. And then we're going to look at sowing seeds of awareness. How do you continually sow seeds through your ministry? So let's kind of dig in right now. The first method of launching, basically there are three what I call methods towards launching towards a public worship service. Now, some of you here might be doing house churches, and that's fine. You know, and that's just another model. And these three methods of launching really advocate that there's going to be some type of public service that the public can come to. And here are three ways that you can work towards that. The first way is what I call the build method. And the build method is basically starting with a cell, you know, that's going to be between 8 to 12 people, seeing that cell multiply a few times, and continue to see cell multiplication happen to the point to where you get maybe about 120 people, and then you begin gathering them in celebration, in more of a celebration service or a public worship service in a larger meeting space. And so basically the build method, everything happens in the cell, in the small group. And evangelism, edification, equipping, and leadership development, and then flows into a celebration service. Now, some groups that have done this, basically what they'll say is they'll start beginning cells, and they'll say, we're not going to do a larger celebration gathering until we have 4 cells developed. And maybe then we'll do a once a month gathering. Others would say, you know, when we get 8 cells, then we'll do a twice a month gathering. And then when we get 12 cells, you know, then we'll start meeting on a weekly basis. But you know, this is a method, and like in everything, all these no method is perfect, and no approach is perfect. There are strengths and weaknesses in all of these. Some of the strengths of the build approach is that it builds, you know, reproducible relational systems. You know, it builds. You have a stronger, in a sense, leadership development plan that's going on because leaders are being developed in the cell. You know, it's basically can be, you know, this model is used all over the world, and that's a strength. And then it can be lay driven. It doesn't need to be led by professional leaders. It can be run through small groups. Some of the weaknesses are that it's slow, it's time consuming. A lot of church planters or high D or high I's really don't have the patience for kind of building this methodical system. You know, it could be actually another weakness with this model is it could be culturally insensitive. You know, it's very interesting. You know that a lot of people in North America don't, you know, wouldn't consider going to a small group first unless they knew a lot of the people in the group. But a lot of people will walk into a larger event, you know, and try to be can be anonymous there. So it could be, you know, culturally insensitive. So and then eventually, I think the build approach eventually drifts into what I would call the draw approach, which we're going to look at next. Because once you offer a public worship service, no matter how you get there, the fact is that you always will have to deal with people walking in the front door, walking in with no relationship with anybody else in the church, and you're always going to have to deal with that because if it's a public service, that means anybody can come at any time. So that would be one of the aspects of that. The second approach or method towards launching is what I call the draw approach. The draw approach. Basically, drawing people to high impact events and building your launch team through those events. Now this, Nelson Searcy in his book, Launch, has really done a great service to the church, and that's just an excellent book for anybody who is looking to do that approach. But let me just kind of describe this to you a little bit. So you've got a high impact church planting team, and you know, that could be 4 or 5 people, and that team basically launches a service, what we used to call a preview service. And what I like is what Nelson now described, and I think it's actually a better term, and in the re-edit of my book I'll probably use his terminology, but he likes to call them monthly services. And that is so much more understandable to unchurched people. And actually it's a great advantage. We've had some of our new churches do monthly services, and unchurched people come to them and say, man, this is the greatest church ever. You know, it only meets once a month, and I can do that. And especially when you're dealing with unchurched people who hadn't been in church in years, for them to come once a month is actually a big win. So so you launch a service, and sometimes you borrow people from other churches to help put that service on, and then you do what you want to re-engage people and bring them back and kind of build and grow the launch team. And you do that through what some would call comeback events. That could be a barbecue at the pastor's house. That could be a planning meeting for the next service. And so you kind of launch with you launch this service, try to get as many people to come to this first preview service, and then you invite people back in, and then you repeat that. You repeat that up to, I would say, 6 times. You could do it up to 6 times until you get a large enough launch team to where you can launch your public worship service, your grand opening, where you're meeting every week. Now, I've seen several people do this. A friend of mine named Dan Harrison, he did this in the late 90s, and basically, you know, he started just with him and his wife and a couple other people, and borrowed musicians, borrowed Sunday school workers, and probably had 130 people at his first preview service, and he did 3 or 4, and probably averaged over 100 at those, and then when he did his grand opening, had close to 300 people at his first service. And so here are some of the numbers that go along with that. Now, again, with any approach, there is weaknesses and strengths. And you know, one of the weaknesses with the draw approach is that it can be performance driven. You know, and maybe focuses more on the Sunday morning service. It can draw what I like to call professional Christians, you know, and those with the what's in it for me attitude. You know, sometimes it can draw dysfunctional Christians who have bad attitudes towards the church and leadership, and can really reestablish, reinforce the consumer mentality in a new church, in the church culture. And then the fourth weakness of the draw approach would be that it has a fragile infrastructure, because, you know, a lot of people don't know each other, and just in 6 months building that launch team, it can be very fragile. And we've seen a number of churches have what we call, within the first 6 months of meeting, we'll face some type of crisis, vision crisis, values crisis, leadership crisis, something like that. But some of the strengths are, you know, it does provide quick results. Unchurched people come to these things, and I hear stories all over the place. It's also appealing to what we call de-churched Christians. You know, people who have had some sort of commitment to the church but have dropped out for some reason. And it's a way that you can engage them, because maybe they would come to check out this event. You know, it feels more legitimate than going into a small group. That's could be another strength, and it works well for high D, high I driven church planters and seeing those quick results take place. And so that's the second approach, and then the third approach would be what I would call a combination of the two. Build enough to draw. Build enough to draw. And what I mean by that is that you're going to start some cell groups in the beginning. You're going to try to get Christians in prayer groups. You're going to try to get some of your leaders in what I would call task groups, and then you're going to actually start seeker cells also during this time. And you might have a few of those. You might have a lot of those. I've had churches have 1 to 3 as they were in this stage, to churches that have had 10 to 15 of these cells going on during this formation of the church, coupled with outreach events and doing outreach events on an ongoing basis for seekers. Either servant evangelism or block parties, all sorts of events and ideas that you can come up with here. Then out of this, you start building people into what we call a launch team, and you move people to launch team meetings, which will probably be Sunday nights, or a night, if you're a day or a time where you're not going to do your public worship service. And then as you build that, we as you build your team and you continue the outreach events, you continue gathering people in small groups, and you do training, and the last I think session 4 is all about how to build a launch team. I encourage you to take a look at that. Then what you want to do is you go into what we call a soft launch. And this is meeting on Sunday mornings for worship, but you're not doing any marketing or advertising. It's all word of mouth. And you don't have this grand opening effect. You just begin worshiping on Sunday morning, and it's all word of mouth through all the relationships that you have with those people. This gives you a way to kind of ease into the public service, to practice, to kind of get your ministry set up and get used to your rented facilities, your setup and takedown, all that stuff, and it doesn't put as much pressure on the team. And then you would move towards doing a grand opening. And so the timeline in all this is typically, in this approach would be probably a 9-month time period. And what we say is that you can't be in the womb more than 9 months, and so you want to be very careful in how you create momentum and how you manage this. And so we've seen churches, for instance, start in January, begin building their team. They're doing outreach events. They're gathering their launch team, and then what they'll do is they'll do a soft launch on Easter and get as many people as they can there. And we've seen people get 100 people just at a soft launch with no advertising, just word of mouth. And then they'll build through the summer and through those services without any marketing. They'll continue to build the team and strengthen the team. And then in the fall, we've seen churches launch with over, close to 300 people at their first public worship service. The great thing with that is one of the things we talk about all the time is that we want to see conversion growth happening before the church has its public worship services. And so we've seen in our churches, the record to date is about 33 people being baptized and coming to Christ through before they had their grand opening. and we've had others in the 20s, you know, and that just creates a solid evangelistic DNA, a solid missional DNA in your church. So here are some some statistics that we've seen. You know, if you have about 35 to 40 people gathering with you on Sunday night in a launch team stage, typically when you go Sunday morning, you will increase that by 20 to 50%, because Sunday morning is more as a regular time for meeting church, and so you'll have more consistency with that. And if you do the you know, you launch big and create awareness in your community, you can get up to what I would say almost 4 times. We've seen it 4 times the size of your launch team. So typically 3 to 4 times the size of your launch team. So here's the kind of definition. Basically, the building up the draw is employing the highly relational aspects of the build approach with the explosive dynamics of the draw approach, and this increases retention of the crowd. And so we've seen churches that just do the draw approach. Typically, if they would have 200 people at their first service, they will drop down to probably 100 after the launch. But if they had 40 on their launch team, that means they've doubled their launch team, at least more than doubled their launch team through that launch, and then they have to grow steadily from there. But what we've seen is that when people use the building up the draw approach, we see a higher retention of the crowd because there are more people, more relational glue in the church, and more sticking points for new people to be attached to it. So that kind of gives you an idea of just you need to choose as a church planner. You have to decide which approach best fits my personality, my team, my ministry philosophy to see this take place. Then I want to talk a little bit about what I call the 3 spheres of outreach. The 3 spheres of outreach. And basically, the 3 spheres involve, number 1, the first sphere of outreach is people who are connected to the church planter. People who are connected to the church planter. And if you joined us earlier, you know that we strongly encourage planters to enter the community missionally and to strongly learn how to network well and to begin gathering people. And so that's the first sphere. The second sphere is people who are connected to your people. So as you're developing your team and you're gathering this launch team together, you are going to have every person that you're reaching is going to have connections outside the group and potential people that they can reach. And so that's the other sphere. And then the third sphere is people who are unconnected. They're unconnected with the planter, they're unconnected with the people that you have, and they're out there in your community. Okay? So just to kind of give you an example of this, I have a church planter who is in an area and of about probably, let's say, 30,000 people, and would be in his target area, and he's a great networker, and he has probably in 9 months got about 200 to 250 people who know who he is by name and know that he's here to start a church. Okay, and he has got about 40 adults now on his launch team, and so if you just kind of figure that out, how many people are connected with those 40 adults? And if we just said, let's just throw a number out, 20, that each adult would be able to invite 20 people to maybe come to a Bible study or come to an outreach event or come to a public worship service. basically that comes up to, so you got the planters got 200 people they're connected with, and their church has, let's say, 20 times 40 is 800, and so now you have about 1,000 people that are within reach within those two spheres. But you're living in a community of 30,000 people, so what's your strategy for reaching and creating awareness among the 28,000 people in your community? And I believe church plants need to have a strategy for that. And so so the strategies for each of these spheres is one, the planter needs to model the evangelistic missional lifestyle. They need to model that the fact of how they build relationships with unchurched people and share a verbal witness with them. They need to model how to serve within their community. They need to model how to network effectively within the life of that community. The strategy, the second sphere is equipping your people how to live a missional lifestyle, equipping your people how to serve in the community, equipping your people how to share a verbal witness, equipping your people how to invite people, to engage people either into a small group or an outreach event or a public service, and then also giving them tools to see that happen. But the third strategy for outreach is this, what I call sowing seeds of awareness. Sowing seeds of awareness to the unconnected people that are within your sphere of reach. To the thousands of people who live, within walking distance of the high school or the civic center or the movie theater that you're meeting in. To the thousands of people who have no idea what's going on there. And so how are you going to engage them? How are you going to sow seeds of awareness into their lives? So here's a couple ideas for sowing seeds of awareness. The first one is what I would call the incarnational kind of method, is just where you're doing raw community service. You're just loving your community incarnationally, and you're just kind of begging people to ask you why you're doing this stuff. Whether it's raking leaves in a neighborhood, or whether it's cleaning up a street, or whether it's volunteering at City Hall for doing certain service projects, or whether it's joining other service organizations in your community. That's actually a better one, to actually join other community service-oriented groups and doing projects with them instead of creating your own group to do certain projects. And there's a whole website on this. I encourage you to get it, take a look at it. It's called With Reach. And the great thing with community service is that you can invite unchurched people to come with you and say, hey, we're going to go down and we're going to help this school that is struggling, and we're going to do a painting project. You want to come with us? Or you can do a Habitat for Humanity project, or you could go and work at the food pantry, or you can work in a soup kitchen, and you can bring unchurched people with you. And so they can engage what it means to serve people, and we've seen that happen over and over and over again. The church I personally attend has done several of these, what they call Share Fests. Another resource would be here is the Church of Irresistible Influence, a great book for you to read if you're talking about just doing community service in your area and kind of learning how to love your community incarnationally. So that's one way of sowing seeds of awareness. The other one is servant evangelism. And the difference between community service and servant evangelism is this. Servant evangelism is actually earning the right to give somebody information about your church. Steve Sjogren, in his book, The Conspiracy of Kindness, is an excellent resource. I think every church planter should read that. Every church planter should be familiar with his website, because you want to mobilize your people out there to in very kind and generous ways, give a gift, whether that's big or small, do an act of service, whether it's big or small, but then actually give them. And the key thing is giving them this connection card that says, we're doing this in the name of Jesus, and here's our church, here's our location, here's where you can get more information about who we are. And that's the difference. That's a big difference between just doing community service and doing servant evangelism. It's another step of earning the right to make that invitation. Another way of sowing seeds of awareness is giving invitations, really nice-looking invitations to certain events. For instance, if you're going to do a grand opening Sunday where you're kind of having this, you're birthing the church, one of the most effective ways to get people there is to have, it's almost like a wedding invitation that you make up that says you're invited, and on the inside it gives all the information about the grand opening of this new church. And actually, what you do is you encourage your people to write a personal note inside that says, hey, Tom and Betty, I've been telling you about our new church that we're part of. We're having our grand opening Sunday. We'd love to see you be there with us to celebrate this experience with us. And that has been, one of the most effective ways that we've seen people not only get people into the church, into a public worship for the first time, but also it has a higher retention rate. Other ways of sowing seeds of awareness is direct mail. Direct mail still works, and we've actually done. In the past I've given out direct mail grants. Some guys have said no, we don't want to use them. We want to do more of a relational approach. And I've said, well, you're not going to get the money to do the direct mail, and I've encouraged them to do it so we can have some R&D, research and development, so we can figure out, does direct mail still work? Well, you know what? It still works. It works in urban centers. It works in rural areas. It works in suburban cultures. And you've got to keep. It is a method that works. Drawback is it's expensive, and so it's getting more and more expensive to do it. And back in my day, we could send out 20 years ago, I could send out one mailer to our city and get 100, 200 people to come to the first service. Well, now, then in the 90s, it was taking us 3 mailers, to get that sort of crowd. And now we're seeing it takes about 5 to really get a big crowd on Sunday morning. And so it's getting harder. Our culture is getting more brazen. Our culture is getting more hardened, and so you really need to work on that, look at that. And I'm going to give you a few tips on that, on direct mail, and why it works and why it doesn't work in a few minutes. The other thing is social networking. Facebook works. Using those Facebook ads works. We have churches that are using those all over the country, and they work, and you can localize those, and you can limit them to your budget. But they are working. People are getting connected, churched and unchurched people together. Your website is now the website is now the front door to the church, and having a good, clean, functional, professional-looking website where you're going to have video and audio is now crucial to the future of churches. And it is amazing to me. I did an interim pastorate a year or so ago, and we had people coming after they listened for about 6 months to sermons online. And so you've got to get on the web, and you've got to have a good, crisp, clean, functional website. On the front page of the website, you've got to have who you are and where you meet. That all needs to be clear and crisp. And what can people expect in coming to your church? And then you need to have a media center And, if the minimum you want to do is have the messages on there, but as soon as you can get video, the better you'll be in those areas. And then branding, and branding is basically this: you're burning the message of your church, the vision of your church, into the mindsets of your community. And that takes a layered approach. All of these approaches, if you got to figure out how am I going to burn the image of our church, the vision of our church, the name of our church into our community. It's going to take all these things working together in what I would call a layered approach. And you need to use that multiple touches in your community, and because you never know what God is going to use in a person's life at that moment. It could be through a personal invitation. It could be through someone giving them a granola bar with a connection card on it. It could be through them just searching the web. It could be through a friend who invited them on Facebook to come to it. It could be through just working in a service project in the community. You never know what God is going to use and how He is going to bless the efforts of your church. So you've got to figure out how to sow seeds of awareness. I just last spring, and I'm going to do it again this spring, I kind of reseeded my lawn, and I did it for years, and I never was really good at it. And I would reseed my lawn, and I would sprinkle some seed out there, maybe a bag of seed, and it wouldn't really strengthen my lawn. And then I hired somebody professionally to do it, and they dumped pounds and pounds of seed on it, and they took root, and my grass looks a lot better this year. And so the reason why I wasn't getting results is because I didn't cast enough seed. And the number one reason why churches don't get the results that they want and they wish for and they pray for is because they're not casting enough seed. And so you need to have what I call a sowing mentality. And if you go on my blog, you'll see I wrote an article, four posts on what's it take to have a sowing mentality in your church, and that will give you some great insight on that. Well, let me just talk to you a little bit about marketing. Marketing, basically, every church has a marketing plan. The only difference is some are better than others. And here's the big issue with marketing, because I've heard churches after churches say, we've done it and it didn't work. We did it and it didn't work. Well, there is what I call specific event or day, specific event marketing, and then there's general awareness marketing. And the specific event invitations work the best. And you're going to get better results by doing this. Most churches today do what I call general awareness. And they're not marketing a certain day or a certain sermon series throughout the month of a church. They typically just say, well, here we are, and find out more about us on our web. And that's just basically general awareness. And so you see general invitations, newspaper articles, billboards, park benches, bus signs, television commercial, radio commercials. Now, you can make all those into what I would say event specific if you have dates on there. If you put a billboard up that says, hey, we're starting this series on this date, or you draw them to a website that says we're starting this in this certain date. So those are some things. Let me give you an example. This is a real life example. About 10 years ago, I got 2 postcards in my mailbox at my home, and one is an example of general awareness, and one is an example of specific invitation. One church was a church of 50, and still probably is a church of under 100. The other church was a church of 500 at the time and is now probably a church of over 5,000. And so I'm going to just walk through this and show you. So here's the first one. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds each on these. We're going to have John put up a poll, and we want you to vote on either A or B. Which one is 500? Which one is the church of 500? Which is the church of 50? Okay, so here's the first one. That's the front side of the postcard. Here's the second side of the postcard. And I'm just going to give you 30 seconds because that's all people will look at it. Okay. Here's the second one, card B. Again, going to give you 30 seconds. You know, I received both of these the same week in my mailbox. And then here's the back side. Again, 30 seconds on that. All right. Which one, A or B? And John, can you put that survey up? See if we get the first one or second one. Which one was 50 people, the first one or the second one? All right. Well, I'll let you. I'll bring you in on here. I can't actually see the survey results, but
they're actually about 50-50 right now.
50-50. Okay. All right. I'll tell you the answer. The church of 50 is the first one, building a strong family. So let's go back to that one, and let me get back up here. Now, the cover of this postcard, you know, is it's good. The thing I would change on here would be a question. I would say, do you want help in building a strong family? I always like questions because they stick in people's minds longer. Or do you want to strengthen your family? Just some type of question. Now let me show you the back side. Now here's the problem on the back side of this. It's all general awareness. And it's all about the church. They're describing the church. They're basically trying to sell the church to their community. They're trying to say, look at us, look at what we're doing, you need to be a part of us. That is not a motivator for unchurched people. It's not a motivator. And most churches, all they do is promote their programs. And promoting your programs is not going to capture the heart of unchurched people. Now, let's look at card B. Look at what he said here. You know, one of the key words in marketing is the word you. You've worked hard to provide a home. You've pushed to excel in your job. You've sacrificed to become a great parent. Now here's the question, the specific invitation question. Will you invest 5 weeks to recapture the romance? And then on the back, it gives you the details. And here this is a lot of white space, very readable, points you right to the thing, gives a list of 5 Sundays, you know, and in reality, most people won't come to the first one, but they'll try to come to one, especially unchurched people. And so, again, you got general awareness and specific invitation. You've got to be more and more specific in any marketing you do, whether that is through social networking, whether that's connection cards, through personal invitations, through ads. You've got to really push the envelope on being more and more specific and calling people to action, calling them out of their homes, you know, calling them out of their workplaces to be a part of what you're doing. So, all right. Well, I guess now we'll here's a couple postcards. I'll give you an example here. there are 6 questions that every person will ask when they get a invitation, a postcard, or something in the mail, and we'll run through these real quick. The first one is, so what? You know, why should I do this? What's the big issue here? You know, are you talking to me? Another question is, are you talking to me? What do you want? What do you want specifically to do? An unchurched person is going to ask you, what does this group want from me? Well, you've got to tell them it. You want them to come to this series of messages. You want them to come to your grand opening. Why should I believe you? What on your information is going to be credible, that's going to make you credible in your community? And then, who are you? Describe yourself in friendly ways. And, the great thing with a lot of young pastors is they have great young families. And so, that's a great picture. And you might not want to put cantankerous teenagers on there, but, that loving family just says, hey, this guy looks normal. And then, why would I like you? That's another question that you want to consider. Well, I'm going to show you a sample of a blast from the past. When I started my church, I had no money for marketing, and so here's a blast from the past. This is over 20-some years ago, but I went to the local newspaper director, and I figured out a way to sow seeds in my community. And basically, I could insert this little flyer in the newspaper, get it printed and inserted into 12,000 subscription-based newspapers for $500. And so we used to do it 3 times a year, and God used it. God blessed it. It's cheap. But it was effective, and it was fruitful. I can't tell you how many people came to Christ because they kept getting these goofy little inserts in the newspaper. Well, I didn't know those 6 questions back then, but by God's providence, I answered all 6. What do you want? Are you talking to me? Back in the early 90s, success was a huge theme. Every book was talking about success, Christian books and business books. Why would I like you? There's a little description of who our church was, who I was. Who are you? And then, what do you want? A specific ask. So, and why will I believe you? Here we had a gentleman, a local newscaster, come and give his testimony. And that is a principle, what they call the power of association. And so, hey, this guy's coming to town. Well, maybe we'll go and check him out. So that's one. All right. Well, John, let's take some questions.
All right. I got a couple here for you. Let's start here. For those of you, or for those of here who have not yet launched, what advice can you give them for determining which launch method is most appropriate for their context?
Well, if they have not launched,
right.
Yeah. Again, it goes. I think I'd have to really ask them a lot of specific coaching questions about their personality, whether they're on a what I would say. A lot of our church planners raise about 3 years missionary support, and so they need to be a self-funding church in 3 years. And so it depends how much time you have. Or if you're bivocational and you're not in a hurry, I mean, I'd need to know all those factors. What's your philosophy of ministry? Are you, more relational? If you're a high D, you're gonna, you probably want to get started right away. And are you more teaching oriented, or are you more relationally driven? Mm-hmm. So you've got to kind of figure out that stuff. So it'd be very hard for me to say which approach to choose. Now, I personally tend to push our guys to do like the build enough to draw, because we've seen more conversion growth in that method, in that process. Mm-hmm. So because they're doing small groups, they're doing outreach, and they're building their launch team for about 6 to 9 months, and we really see a lot of spiritual fruit through that.
Great. Sticking with the kind of the first-time planter theme here, what advice would you give a first-time planter about keeping first things first in terms of staying focused on the Great Commandment, Great Commission, as opposed to what some would argue to be membership issues or, developing the organization?
Yeah. Well, as a first-time planter, you're going to have to, what I tell them is the first 150 people are built on your personal one-on-one skills. And typically a pastor can pastor what we call a single-cell church, which would be about 150, under 200 people. And one full-time pastor can handle that. And so you've got to really work on those skills of sharing your faith, those skills of recruiting others to join your team, those skills of gathering people into groups, those skills of empowering others to lead groups and empowering others to run ministry teams. And so you're going to, that's some of the key skills. Now, once you launch the church, you want to make, if you're going to do a public, launch service and you're going to invite people to your service, you need to improve that service as it goes. And so I really tell people, focus on your networking, all those one-on-one personal skills, and then really work on making your public service work. And then, about 6 months to a year after the launch, you're going to start working on those. Now, there's some basic organizational skills you need to have developed. So your financial systems need to be developed. We encourage you not to have elders or formal church leadership for at least 2 to 3 years. And then, we'll talk about our next time. We'll talk about how to do membership and when to do membership, when to start doing your what I call mobilization seminars and things of that nature. So.
Cool. Great. No, that's good. Let's take one more here. And in terms of marketing, for a team or community looking at launching their first public service, what are those critical elements that absolutely must take place on that first Sunday, or at least during that first service?
Yeah. I have a checklist of 25 things to do for that. And number one is, one of the things, by the most effective way, is up to, probably 6 weeks prior to the launch Sunday, you want to get your launch team. Let's say you have 40 adults on your launch team, okay? You want to get each one of those adults to develop a prayer list, and and ask them to build a list of about 25 people. Challenge them to get 25 people that they could personally invite to that service, okay? And then what you want to do is you want to come together in your launch team phase and actually pray out loud for each one of those individuals. And then a week before the launch, you want to send them all a personal handwritten invitation to join you for that event. That is by far one of the most effective ways that we've seen people come into the life of the church. The other thing is that if you're going to do the marketing, you're going to do a strong marketing approach, you need to be about 3 months prior, designing your postcards. And here's the thing. Get somebody to check off on those postcards. Unfortunately, too many companies out there now, I think, have these postcards that are designed to reach church people. And you need to, I tell all of my planters before I actually give them money to do it, I have to have the write-off on their marketing device, their postcard, or whatever they're going to use, because unfortunately, we are getting so far removed from our culture and from unchurched people that we're not asking the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the last segment I talked about in preaching is you need to figure out how to ask the questions and answer the questions that your culture is asking. And I think every time I talk with Christians, they really don't understand what the culture is thinking. And as pastors, church planners, we need to know what kind of questions they're asking, and we need to provide the answers for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, so there's going to take that's a lot of planning to get that stuff out. The other thing is that you need to sow lots of seeds. And one church said, well, we didn't have anybody come, and I asked them, how many cards do you do in your community? Well, we only could afford 5,000. Well, typically the ratio is that you're probably going to get maybe 5 people if you do 5,000. So there's the rule, what we call the law of large numbers. And if they go on my blog, I have 17 insights on marketing on my blog, GaryRohrmeyer.com. You can go on there, search that, and all these are listed there on the blog, and you can walk through those and get some more deeper insights on those things. But there's the law we call the law of large numbers, and so for you to get 100 people, at your service, you're going to have to send at least 25 to 35,000 cards out there. Now, somebody will say, well, Gary, we only have 17,000 people in our target area. Okay, then you want to saturate that 3 or 4 times to get those high launch numbers. So
yeah.
So the big thing is sowing seeds. Whatever model you use, whatever method you use, you got to do a lot of it. And it's a lot of hard work.
Indeed.
And
Indeed.
Church planting is not for the faint of heart. So.
That's for sure. So, well, Gary, thank you so much. I know we're running up against our hour here, and so I want to thank you for sharing your insights and wisdom with us today. You can see Gary's new book there, Spiritual Conversations, Creating and Sustaining Them Without Being a Jerk. Great pick up there. For those of you who are in either the pre-launch stage or launching right now. And we look forward also to the next and what will be the final webinar in this series of webinars, which will happen on April 14th. That's a Wednesday at 3 Eastern, 2 Central, 1 Mountain, and noon Pacific. And actually, I'm going to send out a registration link right now for those of you who are on the chat feature. You can actually click on that link and go and register for that webinar right now if you'd like. So thanks to all of you who have participated in today's webinar. Thanks for all your questions and your comments, and we hope it was a meaningful and beneficial experience for you. Our desire is that these webinars will help you be more fruitful in your ministry as you pursue the calling that God has given you. And so if you have any questions about today's webinar or comments, you can submit them to CoachNet at support@coachnet.org. You can also find some more helpful information on Gary's blog, which is, again, GaryRohrmeyer.com, or you see another website there, yourjourney.org, which is Gary's resource page as well. As I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, today's event is being recorded, and it'll be available from the CoachNet North America website at coachnet.org. So thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to connecting with you again in April. Peace.